guys, welcome to my channel. I hope you're all doing very well. So I just watched 28 Years Later. Let's talk about it. So 28 Years Later is the sequel to 2002 film 28 Days Later, and both were directed by Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, who's dabbled in directing himself in more recent years. But the duo are back working together to bring us another sequel to the 28X franchise that deals with a breakout of the rage virus here in the UK and the UK alone. No one else has to deal with this, which I find endlessly hilarious. I love the fact that the whole world managed to get this sorted. They managed to nip this rage virus in the bud, and then they turned to the UK, saw how much of a mess we were, saw how far gone we were, and decided, hell nah, we're not gonna help them. We're not going to help them. We're not going to try and sort that out. We're just going to quarantine them. Kind of reminds me of how the Mad Max universe only takes place in Australia. And I guess the rest of the world is just fine. So in my headcanon, I'd like to think that this is all one universe. You have all these post-apocalyptic universes where you've got the Hunger Games going on in America, and then you've got the rage virus zombies going on in the UK. Australia has Mad Max. Like, all of these end of the world scenarios are happening all at once in isolation, and the world is just a mess. The world is on fire, but in different ways. I think that's a fun idea. But whilst 28 Days Later set up the first month of this major zombie outbreak, here we fast forward on 28 years, where we see how the world has evolved, or rather regressed in some cases, and we're introduced to brand new characters to follow on this story in this journey of trying to survive whilst the rage virus rages on. I must say, I had an excellent time with this film. I think this was a brilliant sequel to the 2002 movie. There's also the other film, 28 Weeks Later, which I haven't seen. And I've heard mixed things about, so I tend to ignore that one. But even still, this is an excellent entry into this 28 franchise. So first of all, when it comes to the story, I think it's really, really solid. I like the fact that we're introduced to brand new characters. We're focusing on a whole different family, and we have a whole new protagonist in Spike to follow in this journey. And we're also in a different corner of the UK. We're in this secluded island in Scotland, as opposed to in 28 Days Later, which was set in like central London, bang on. And so we get to have a different experience of how this virus has affected the country. And then the fact that so much time has passed also allows for some changes and some evolutions in not only society and the people, but also the zombies themselves, because now we get different variations of them. Some of them are just blobs, like some of them are literally just like zombie slugs, and some of them are, you know, these like thin athletic zombies that seem to be super fast and super, you know, murderous. And then you even have these giant zombies, which I don't even know, like, how how did that happen? But apparently to some people, the rage virus acts as a steroid and kind of beefs them up even more, and so you have these zombies kind of interlude into this ecosystem as well. So I think that was a really cool development that made for a visually interesting experience. And speaking of visual interest, that's another thing that really elevates this film. Danny Boyle makes some fantastic choices with the visuals, with the sounds, oh my goodness, with the sound design of this movie, particularly the first half, but also throughout the film there's some incredible, haunting, terrifying, strange visuals, but especially like that first kind of scene, that first moment, and it was featured in the trailer as well. You have this kind of disclaimer, this kind of warning that's said by some woman, and it sounds really ominous. It sounds so scary. It just kind of builds and builds and builds, and it goes on for a long time, much longer than I thought it would based off of the trailer. And then you have some flashing images of things that seem unrelated, that hint to things to come thematically. That scattering of images and the way that that's edited just makes it so visually interesting and unique. And it just feels like Danny Boyle put his stamp on every single scene and every single moment of this film. And that's exactly what it needed to really stand out as a legacy sequel. I love that. And I love how British this film feels as well. Even though the cameras have definitely upgraded in comparison to the ones used in 2002, it does look cleaner, but it doesn't look Hollywood clean. It doesn't look too polished. It still looks a bit rough and ready, and they're still using innovative methods to really push the boundaries of what they can do in this franchise and in this genre. For instance, they did promote the kind of iPhone device that was created for this film, where you had like 28, I don't know, a number of iPhones kind of next to each other to portray a certain scene that was close up and chaotic and mad. And all of these creative decisions that Danny Boyle and co made culminated to create such a visceral, exciting and relatively unique visual experience that I really enjoyed. And the characters for this film were also standouts. In particular, like I mentioned, we have Alfie Williams just knocking it out of the park as young Spike. There are times where you do get a little bit annoyed with him. We'll talk about that in a second, where he makes certain decisions, but that is not a knock on Alfie's acting whatsoever, because he was given that script and he did a hell of a job with it. So he was absolutely phenomenal, and I would definitely put him up there with The Kid from Adolescence as one of the best kid performances that we have seen in many years. But then we also have the Queen. Yeah, we also have the Queen, one of the queens of British acting, and that is none other than Jodie Comer. Duh. Like, literally, duh. When is she not good? It's literally, she is incapable of doing a bad job. She's like Viola Davis. Like, it's not in her to do a bad job. She might be in a mid project, but she ain't ever gonna flop. Like, she's never gonna be the weakest link. That's not who Jodie is. So I'm a huge fan of Jodie already. I've watched her in a whole bunch of projects. I've watched Help. I've watched, obviously, Killing Eve. I've watched a whole bunch of stuff with Jodie Comer in it. So I already been knew that she's good. But she's excellent here as this poor dying mother who suffers from a lot of amnesia and confusion. And there are even times when she's out here doing things that she doesn't even realize she's doing, in these waves and moments of confusion, like defending herself and her son from one of those slimy zombies, one of those ground dwelling zombies. And then the next morning she doesn't even remember. She doesn't remember what happened, which is crazy. But it is revealed at the end there, when they finally meet the doctor and she gets her diagnosis, that she did know. She did suspect that she had cancer. Unlike her son, who was only brought up in this horrible world and in that dodgy community, she does remember the before times, and so she's likely aware of things like cancer and medicines like Nurofen that no longer exist anymore. Hey, how are people surviving? Or imagine dealing with period pains. Oh my goodness. Because of the lack of resources and the fact that the community doesn't even have a doctor, hence why they have to go all the way to Ray Fiennes and his crazy ass, she knew that there was no hope, and so she was just slowly dying in that bed, going mad and suffering from intense pain and having these nosebleeds with nothing else to be done. And that's just really heartbreaking. You see how much of a pure, kind soul she was in moments where she does have her mind about her, like when she tries to save that baby who came from an infected woman but isn't infected herself, and also when she's just, talking to her son, trying to get him to smile. So it's really sad to see what becomes of her and how she has to suffer before she ultimately passes away. And you do understand why her son wants to do everything he can to try and heal her, and the pain that he has when he fails to do so. And then you have Aaron Taylor-Johnson, who's also great, honestly. Like, he's also great here. Aaron Taylor-Johnson is beloved by Sony. This is a Sony picture, okay? And one thing about Sony is they're going to put Aaron Taylor-Johnson in everything that they can whenever possible. Ever since they saw him in Bullet Train, they were like, oh yeah, we want him in everything. And so they threw him over in Craven, they put him in this. Nosferatu, I don't think Nosferatu is Sony, but all of that momentum is just kind of helping his career, and apparently he's one of the front runners for James Bond. I'm rooting for Aaron Pierre, but let's see what happens. So yeah, he was really good in this as well, as this kind of douchebag of a father. He's not perfect, but you do get the sense that he loves his family. He does love his son, and he does love his wife, but he's just been thrown in like a really difficult position, and he's not really rising to the occasion as best as he possibly could. He's pushing his son to be something horrible and violent and deadly far before he's even ready, and that's kind of causing a huge kind of whirlwind of emotions within his son to begin with. You know, Jamie didn't understand that. He's just all about the glory. He's all about telling the stories to the community and making himself look good as a dad, and having that as a priority ultimately destroyed not only his relationship with his son but his entire family. And then finally we have Ralph Fiennes as Dr. Kelson, who, like I said, Ralph Fiennes is never going to do a bad job. He's excellent. He's brilliant, of course. Now, when you first hear of Dr. Kelson, you hear this horrifying story about a fire that always burns and you see the smoke coming from it, and it turns out he uses that fire to basically burn away the skin and flesh from these deceased people so that he can create this monument of bones in their memory. So he's lost his mind. He's lost his mind. He's absolutely crazy, lost his mind, but he is an intelligent man, and he did used to be a GP, and he is the only doctor within I don't know, 100-mile vicinity. And so, you know, Spike has no choice but to turn to this guy, even though he's clearly bonkers. Like, he's clearly absolutely insane, and he does manage to help, although ultimately he doesn't have good news for Spike's mother. But still, thankfully, by the end, we do see Dr. Kelson survive. So hopefully we will get to see more of him in future installments of this franchise. And speaking of the next installment, let's talk about Jimmy. Let's talk about Jack O'Connell, who pops up right at the very end, right when I had forgotten actually that he was supposed to be in this film, and he is wild. First of all, the reveal that he was in fact the kid that we were introduced to at the very beginning during Breakout Day, where these kids were in the room watching the Teletubbies. Initially, I had thought it was Aaron Taylor Johnson's character, Jamie, that had been a kid watching Teletubbies, and then he grew up to become Spike's father. But it's revealed that actually Jimmy is Jack O'Connell, and he's grown up to head up his own Teletubby-esque crew whilst dressed up as Jimmy He who shall not be named. If you're not British, then you likely won't know much about Jimmy Savile, but he is a disgraced man from British culture who was just horrifying and horrible. You can look it up probably, but yeah, just the worst. Like, just we're talking like Harvey Weinstein and them lot. Okay, the first cancellation of British cancellations, I feel, was Jimmy Savile. So yeah, interesting creative choice to have Jack O'Connell look like that. I understand where they're coming from in terms of the context here, where, you know, he grew up in the early 2000s, late 90s. He watched Teletubbies, hence why everyone has their little, you know, color coding situation, right? If you think of the early 2000s and their teams like Power Rangers, Teletubbies, Tweenies, that's what the kids are watching. And because they are, you know, stunted, they have been stunted developmentally because of this rage virus outbreak. And so it makes sense that as they grew up, they wanted to become like the heroes that they used to watch on TV. And those were the heroes that were popping back in the day. There weren't any Avengers, like there weren't any, there's no Iron Man. And so that's who they looked up to. And that's why he looks like that. So hopefully we do get a sequel for this film, and we will see what comes of this character portrayed by Jack O'Connell. He was already giving a 10 out of 10 performance from the 5 minutes that we got of him, and so I am excited to see him join this franchise and looking forward to see, you know, what he does with this role. So overall, I had a great time with this film, but I did have a few critiques here and there when it came to the story. First of all, I do think that Spike made some dumb decisions along the way that made it really hard to watch the film at times. him deciding to leave the community in search for a cure from this dodge doctor that literally everyone is afraid of, everyone that he respects, despite the fact that he doesn't really respect his father in the moment, but everyone that he has looked up to all his life has said, avoid this man, avoid this crazy ass doctor who has a huge ass fire burning constantly. He ignores their sage advice to go out to look for a cure for his mother, and I just feel like that was a bit dumb. I'm sorry. I feel like that was a bit dumb. I understand that he's really young and naive and also just ignorant, like he has no idea what's going on. I'm surprised he even knows what doctors are, but he certainly doesn't understand that even though Dr. Kelson was a GP, that doesn't make him an oncologist, like a cancer expert or an expert in specific diseases. So him going out and risking his own life and that of his mother in order to search for this doctor was a little bit silly. Like, I don't think the reasoning was quite as solid as it needed to be, especially because he literally just came back from the mainland and had a horrible experience, like a life-threatening experience that he was still traumatized from. And so whilst he's still shaking and quaking from that fear and that anguish, he goes back out again almost immediately for this new mission. That seems a little bit wishy-washy when it comes to logic there. And also the ease with which he managed to escape, you know, and go past all of the guards was again a bit wishy-washy and convenient. And another thing that annoyed me was Isla taking in that baby. I completely agreed with Eric. Yeah, I was on team Eric, okay, and it's not because of my preferential treatment of Edwin Ryder from Young Royals, but it's just because like logic would dictate that you cannot take in this baby that came from this diseased mother's womb, okay? You can't take that risk. Absolutely not. That baby could have well, it couldn't have bitten her, but you never know. You literally never know what could have happened with that baby. So the fact that she just took it in without questions, she looked into its eyes and was like, okay, it's not red, so therefore the baby doesn't have the rage virus. You don't know that. You don't know that. Ultimately, I would not have taken the risk, and I was very annoyed with Isla when she was so vehement about keeping that baby, and I was very upset that Eric ended up dying over this because he was completely in the right. And finally, the fact that so much of this story takes place on the mainland means we get very little intel and very little background on what the hell is going on within that cult of a community. That cultish community with the masks and the rules and everything. Yeah, we don't get a lot of background on that, and that's a sacrifice that we have to pay for being in the mainland so often. Now, it makes sense because the zombies are on the mainland, so if we stayed within the community walls, you wouldn't get much zombie action unless they invaded in, like what happened in The Last of Us Season 2. But I would have liked to see a little bit more context for that creepy community. I still have hope because hopefully we will get some more projects within this franchise, and maybe they'll dabble in explaining what's going on. So perhaps, maybe, fingers crossed, or it could be that they plan to just jump over to whatever the hell is going on with Jimmy and his crew and kind of give us a comparative for how different communities have been formed in this post-apocalyptic Britain. But in the meantime, guys, I'm going to be giving 28 Years Later an 8 out of 10. So that's it from me. Now that I told you guys my thoughts on 28 Years Later, it's time for you guys to let me know what you thought of this film down in the comments below. Please be sure to subscribe to catch new videos coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.